While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Last December, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, issued an advisory warning manufacturers, operators of critical infrastructure, and really anybody associated with industrial control systems about the threats being presented by pro-Russian hacktivist groups. The advisory, issued in conjunction with numerous federal and international agencies, called out groups like the Cyber Army of Russia Reborn, otherwise known as CAR, Z-Pentest, and Sector 16 for taking advantage of insecure connection points and other vulnerabilities that allow these state-sponsored actors to infiltrate, shut down, and ransom their targets in the United States. Historically, many manufacturers would find it hard to believe that their mid-sized business in the heartland of America would be on the radar of foreign terrorist groups. But as our guest for today's episode explains, that's exactly the case. And the threat continues to grow as these threat actors expand their reach. Will Dixon is a senior executive of government and law enforcement at Intel 471, a leading authority on the OT threat landscape. He explains how these groups' initial plans to disrupt water treatment and other critical infrastructure has evolved into the strategic targeting of the U.S. manufacturing sector. Will, thanks for joining us, and welcome to Security Breach. So let's jump right into it a little bit. We know Intel 471 has been doing a lot of work in tracking these pro-Russian hacktivist groups and some of the damage they're doing in targeting in the industrial sector. Kind of kicking things off a little bit, what should we be knowing about these groups in particular? Why are they unique, or what is sort of their course of action right now?
So I think there's two major things that the community need to know about. Firstly is to not think about these groups as hacktivists. We now need to start thinking about these groups as strategically aligned to the state. So while the start of the war in Ukraine saw this huge diaspora of hacktivists and Russian hacktivists targeting a variety of infrastructures and websites and defacing pro-Ukrainian countries worldwide, that's really consolidated now into 5 or 6 key groups. And the intelligence that we have as a community shows clear direction by the Russian state now. The second thing is there's been a change in targeting. We're still opportunistic, but largely we're moving away from classic hacktivist tactics like DDoS and website defacement, and we really are moving into much more strategically important targeting, specifically targeting OT systems and systems that are relatively unique to the OT and ICS space.
So we know that these folks were just sort of looking for a way to get in. Were they looking at a broad range of targets and sort of stumbled across the ICS? Or was this their intent from the start? Were they looking at these industrial control systems to begin with?
So we have seen an evolution. So that evolution has moved from website defacement and DDoS. That still does happen. But given that these are aligned to the state, the war has been going on for just short of 5 years now. And while the Russian state is gaining more insight and knowledge and expertise in how to target systems of more significance, that's actually permeating into the hacktivist groups as well. Resilience has increased on some of the targeting over the last 4 years of website defacements and DDoS. But actually OT systems and ICS systems, they're starting to gain the knowledge and insight how to look for them, how to target them, and then potentially compromise them. They're more high value targets, and that's why the Russian hacktivist groups are starting to target them.
So did this start, we saw some of the stuff that was going on with Iran, and they got after, they were looking at Israeli infrastructure, water treatment facilities and things like that. Then they realized these same industrial control systems are used throughout manufacturing as well. Is it a similar dynamic here, or were they targeting manufacturing from the start?
No, so it's a similar dynamic. Largely what we see from a technical perspective is that they're actually scanning the internet for open systems. So they're specifically looking for HMI systems that are potentially unpatched, vulnerable. They're looking for specific ports. So we couldn't say that the hacktivist groups are directly targeting specific industries and systems. It's more the actual operating systems and the types of technology they're targeting. They're taking that huge net and they're scanning, and then they're looking to move further on when they identify potentially opportunistic things that are hanging out there on the internet that can be targeted.
So do you think, a lot of this started obviously with the war in Ukraine that really sort of jump-started a lot of our, at least the public understanding and the publicity that a lot of these hacks were getting. Do you think that's sort of a cover for a lot of these things that are going on right now as well? They're saying it's because it's more of a pro-Ukrainian response, or is it just, hey, we've got opportunities to mess up and cause some chaos here in some different systems, potentially get some ransomware out of it? What is sort of the motivation there?
Yes, the motivation is they are state linked and they are state directed, but they are criminals. They are still cyber criminals. And actually, one of the most interesting things we see in the hacktivist community is the movement away into the OT systems, but also the potential to conduct ransomware operations. So the Russian hacktivist groups, we see them engaging increasingly with the Russian cybercrime ecosystem that is purely focused on ransomware operations. And actually, once they start to move into this space, they'll be able to conduct both financially motivated attacks as well as disrupt for strategic purposes as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think we know the answer to this question, but I'd still like to get your take on it and offer your feedback, because we've got a lot of small manufacturers that are operating. I'm in Wisconsin here. They're saying, look, I'm in a small town in Wisconsin. I employ 100 people. What is a Russian hacktivist group going to be interested in my system, my server, my network? We know that they are. So maybe you can kind of give us an outline a little bit in terms of why is manufacturing continuing to be a target? Why are they going back to the well, so to speak, in terms of continuing to go after these systems?
So it's interesting. You have to see the wider picture we're operating in, which is cyber is part of what we classify as hybrid warfare. So Russia is conducting hybrid warfare in the European Union and across the West. Last year, the United Kingdom and France, but many European countries will follow that nation-state hybrid warfare, of which sabotage and cyber sabotage and disruption is a key component, is what we classify as a tier one national security threat. So this isn't opportunistic, and this is actually a defined part of Russia's strategy to try and impact the West and raise costs for us supporting Ukrainian activity. So we have to start thinking. It's incredible. I've dealt with a lot of breweries and small regional kind of manufacturers themselves. And you're right, the fact that they're caught up in hybrid warfare with a major state is surprising. But it is true, and that's not because they're specifically being targeted. It's that the fact that the systems at scale are being targeted. So that's an important nuance in understanding that, which is, in effect, they're becoming part of the crosshairs of these big geopolitical conflicts.
And I think one of the misnomers, too, that right now it permeates throughout manufacturing is I'm working with a big provider of this new OT technology that I'm implementing. They should be helping me out here. We have a lot of conversations about it secure by design and where that responsibility falls and how much of it is on the supplier of the new components, HMIs, connection points, automation equipment, whatever, as well as the individuals using it on the plant floor. From your perspective there, what is the right mix? How does that need to work in terms of implementing secure by design at the component supplier level, but then also making sure those using it are taking the right steps to bring it all together in a safe and secure fashion?
So ultimately, to me, this is a question of corporate governance. And actually, it's almost like a step above, which is cybersecurity is one of many risks that the business will be managing. And we need to ensure that the corporate governance processes is managing the risk appropriately. Far too often, cyber is pushed down the stack because it's technical, it's difficult. We try to catch it in the contracting. It actually needs to be defined and managed as a systemic strategic risk that the business is facing and comes from the top down. So the corporate governance structures and the very top of the organization needs to understand this as a risk and make sure that it permeates not just in implementation, in vendor contracting, operations, but through the entire stack of the organization. Otherwise, the responsibility just gets moved into different departments, and ultimately, all we need is one or two HMIs that are hanging out there, with default passwords, unsecured, and that's how these things happen.
No, absolutely. One of the things I picked out there, not to get too far into the weeds on your comments, but you talked about systemic risk. We've talked about strategic risk and how that fits across the enterprise. Systemic risk is kind of an interesting take. Could you maybe just kind of dig into that a little bit more deeper in terms of what you meant there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my background is in government, and when we talked about risk, we talked about systemic risk, which is that potentially we've got systems that are so interconnected in which society rely on that actually the risk aggregates into kind of a systems risk or a systems failure. So, for instance, we use it most in terms of the financial services industry in the UK, which is we only have 4 or 5 major banks, which means they are systemically important, which means that if they are impacted, they systemically impact the country. So actually, some of these technology types and some of the providers, some of the large OT and HMI manufacturers, they're actually systemically important because nearly all your manufacturers will have the same type of technology or vendors. So that's what we classify as systemic risk.
No, it makes sense. And again, it's a shared dynamic. All of those suppliers who are offering new secure componentry, they're not necessarily securing the connection point. They don't really have anything going on with all the legacy stuff that's going on with OT. Bringing that all together continues to be a challenge with the old and the new. I'm kind of wondering, Will, too, when we look at this particular group, these Russian hackers, you say they're definitely state-tied. Do they have certain calling cards? Is there certain characteristics that they try to go on? I mean, we know these tactics are evolving. Not that much, but they're a little bit more complex than they have been in the past. But just wondering if there's any unique features for some of these groups.
So there's definitely differences between the groups. The fact is we know an awful lot about their activities because actually they have communication infrastructure that is largely trackable, and actually you can join their groups. From a technical perspective, there are some technical fingerprints. I would say, though, the most important fingerprint is how they track geopolitical events. So rather than thinking it as technical fingerprints, specific threat actor groups follow specific types of political events. So right now that we have the Olympics on, major sporting event in Italy, we see #OpItaly, and you see specific groups targeting clusters of industries themselves. So rather than thinking about it as technical calling cards, I like to think of them as like MO, operational or political calling cards.
Interesting. And are these things that we should be tracking on the dark web? Are they much more, I guess, less hidden than that? Are they more prominent? Or what are some of the resources we can use to stay on top of these folks?
So I would say, firstly, your large vendors are actually an incredible resource. So obviously, we've got some major providers like Siemens in this space. They've actually got incredible resources. They should be part of the solution in providing. Obviously, threat intelligence is critical to this. So having a deep understanding of what's happening at a technical, operational, and strategic level. But you've got to be realistic, which is not all companies are going to be able to have access to their own threat intelligence provider. I think the best resource for those small, medium, and some of the even larger manufacturers is actually some of the government resources. So CISA, the UK National CyberSecurity Centre, these major cybersecurity agencies are providing alerts, technical information, details details at quite a strategic level from a board governance perspective, all the way down to technical indicators to help protect the system. So my advice would be, you've got an ecosystem out there, government, vendors, specialist providers, all of them can be available to you depending on the resources and the capabilities that you have.
No, I think it's a great point you make up. We've, praised CISA quite a bit here. They're a great resource here in the U.S., but looking internationally as well as some of those other regulatory agencies that are out there that can provide some support and something like this that maybe we might be a little bit unfamiliar with or don't not on our radar as much as it should be.
Yes, and actually what you see is the ecosystem's becoming very aligned. So on the last CISA alert that was put out there were over 30 national agencies on that. So we're increasingly finding that the international partners are collaborating together, collating intelligence, collating information, and rather than putting out 30 separate alerts and resources, actually you've got the entire, you've got an entire ecosystem putting out one very robust set of guidelines across the strategic, operational, and technical level.
Well, makes sense and great resource again. One of the things we've talked about, understanding the threat, detecting the threat. One of the things in manufacturing we still struggle with is that response plan. I think we've gotten so much better, say since Colonial Pipeline, the last 5 years or so, in terms of understanding the threat landscape, but we haven't put resources into the response there. What have you learned in tracking, whether it's the Russian hackers or anybody else, in terms of some of the key elements into at least initiating and starting that response plan to help the enterprise recover if they are hit?
I'd say the key thing that I've learned is practice makes perfect. So, the worst time to be able to dust out your response plan is the day of the attack. So actually what you need to be doing is you need to be working on a regular basis across the business, not just at an operational level, so not just the security operation teams, but actually you take out these scenarios and you plan them with the CEO, the coup, legal, technology, as well as the component parts of your operational teams as well. What we find is that companies are very good at investing in protective controls. So, trying to stop the attack coming in. Actually, the most important controls are those reactive controls, which is how do you build the muscle of an organization to be able to, once it's attacked, be able to withstand it and recover quickly. I think that's the key thing that I've seen over the last 5 years is that we've moved from an era of cybersecurity where that's about proactive defenses and stopping being breached to cyber resilience, which is an understanding that you will be attacked, you will likely be impacted. So the real key now is how do you withstand and recover relatively quickly and minimizing the impact.
Absolutely. So talk to us a little bit, Will, switching gears here a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Intel 471, your company there. What are some of the things that you're doing to help manufacturers not only identify, but also respond to some of these new hacks that are coming their way?
So at Intel 471, we're a company that's been established for well over 10 years now. We're seen as one of the world's leading threat intelligence providers. We think our USP is that we really understand the threat landscape. We really understand how the adversary thinks about the problem, not just from a conceptual stage, but we're really in the threat landscape. We are interacting, engaging, and part of this ecosystem. We think that gives us a cutting edge, which is it can give our customers and clients a real deep technical understanding of when the latest attacks are going to emerge and what's going to be in that attack methodology as well. So we like to think of ourselves as giving our clients that tactical and operational edge in their decision making, in their investment planning. ICS, CNI providers, manufacturing, they're a core component of our client base. But we also partner with large technology companies that are also providing services to those manufacturing companies as well. So we're providing direct, proactive intelligence to many manufacturers, but we're also partnering with some of their vendors to ensure that their capabilities are protected too.
Lots to go after there. I'm just kind of wondering what you've seen over the last 5 years in terms of working with manufacturers. I'm sure at some point you were starting out going, these guys really don't know what they're getting into here, but hopefully things have evolved a little bit. Where have you seen manufacturers get better? Where do you think they still need to improve the most?
So I've definitely seen a increased understanding at a senior leadership level that this is a significant risk. Colonial Pipeline and other major attacks have actually been a core component of that. What I've seen where there's still difficulty is treating the IT systems and the OT systems as separate infrastructures with separate types of controls rather than one integrated technology stack. We still find that a lot of teams are quite separated in how they operate the IT systems and the OT systems, and that's a major vulnerability. The attackers are able to don't distinguish between that. So we find that attackers are able to potentially work between those silos in an organizations, that you might have heavy investment in an IT ecosystem and a very good enterprise cybersecurity team, but the cyber OT team is actually one guy out on his own and not integrated with different tooling. And I think that's quite common actually in the industry still, that they're not integrated security operation centers yet.
No, unfortunately, that is way too common in terms of that silo dynamic. We've talked a ton about that on the podcast in terms of those challenges that are still existing with getting everybody to talk to each other. Other topic I'd like to get your take on too is segmentation. That's always been such a key part of an overall industrial cybersecurity plan. I feel like we implemented segmentation strategies initially and they were successful, but I don't know how well they've evolved over time to deal with more complex attacks, people being able to find different endpoints to go after, and how it all still kind of comes together at some point. What's been your take in terms of have we evolved enough in our segmentation strategies, or do we still have a ways to go there?
I still think there has been progress, and the most mature companies are definitely better protected and better defended. What we find is a concept of the long tail. So while you have well-resourced and in general the best, the companies that invest the most are best protected and have been able to invest in that segmentation. But what we find is there's quite a long tail, and actually there's a vast amount of medium and smaller manufacturers that maybe haven't been able to go through that implementation and segmentation process, and actually they're the ones being targeted. Cyber criminals are very opportunistic. If you invest in resilience and you make it difficult, they will move on. So actually, we do find the hardening at the very top end of the industry is making a difference, but there's still a long tail, to be able to, really design out some of these attacks.
Well, I mean, that's a big trend that we're seeing too, really hitting different parts of the supply chain, trying to get in at some supplier and understanding because of the connectivity that's advanced so much. Well, you can start with that tier 2 supplier and get to the OEM potentially through them in all of those connection points that, as you just alluded to, may not have been segmented or properly secured.
Yes. Supply chain attacks. Obviously, we had Shialoo 2 last year. Supply chain attacks are one, if not the most critical vector for organizations to be looking out for now. It's such a difficult dynamic to be able to defend against, and you really need quite a multi-layered operational and technical approach to defend against these. So in our kind of forward look of what we think is happening in 2026, we still expect some major supply chain attacks to impact the industry.
Absolutely. One of the things I'd be interested to when you have a topic like Russian hacktivists or Russian hackers, and how do you broach that with employees potentially to understand that they play a role in the enterprise cybersecurity level without freaking them out, without scaring them essentially to the point where if they do click on a link or open an email or go someplace they shouldn't have, they still need to share that information. I think this particular topic, when we look at state-sponsored groups, is intimidating for a lot of frontline employees, and they don't want to admit that they get caught up in that. I'd be curious, how do you broach that conversation with companies in saying, this is a real threat, don't let it scare you, we've got solutions here, and this is how you can talk to your employees about it. What's been your experience there, I guess?
So the best advice and the best responses I've seen this is around culture and leadership who really understand that resilience and cyber resilience comes from building a resilient culture and a cyber resilient culture. Too often you'll find that cybersecurity employee training is all about clicking and phishing tests and, KPIs. What you really want is you want a leadership team that's talking about how the entire organization is responsible for managing a business risk. What you find, your question about talking about Russian hackers, of course it freaks people out.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't be freaked out about, you're going about your day job and then you have an external person talking about a nation state potentially targeting you. What we find is we need to talk in language that the business understands, which is we have a potential risk that we are trying to manage. It's an important risk. The business is investing in this risk and we all have a part to play. What is key to this is we're all transparent and that there's nobody's going to be punished because of a security lapse, like clicking on a link. But what we want to do is we want to provide a transparent, secure culture to help us succeed as a business because this is a specific risk we're trying to manage and mitigate. So I think, those key things, which is this is about culture, this is about good leadership, and this is about speaking the language of the business.
No, you've mentioned that a couple of times with the C-suite buy-in and how that permeates throughout the organization. Same thing with culture. Starts at the top, and once everybody buys into it and understands the level and the priority that cybersecurity needs to be, that obviously helps have these open conversations that we need to have. Wrapping up here, Will, just a couple of questions I like to ask everybody who comes on Security Breach. Trends. What are some of the big things that you see might be impacting cybersecurity over the next year or so?
Well, I'm going to give you a contrary opinion that you might not get. I don't think AI is as impactful as people think in the cybercrime ecosystem. And I think for 2026, we'll finally put a realistic lens on what we think that AI will do to the cybercrime in particular landscape. There's an awful lot of hyperbole about AI and how it's going to transform cybersecurity threats. The reason behind this is obviously people have very vested interests in being able to hype up the threat and talk about fear and doubt and ensure that their products and services are being taken. What I think we're seeing and what we want to say as a business is we think that AI is an evolution, but it's not transformative to cybercrime operations. Yes, we are seeing some parts of the attack lifecycle become more efficient, but we're not seeing transformative new attack methodologies emerge overnight. So when I talk about the 2026 trend in AI, I like to give that, which is it's a continuation and evolution of the threat, not a transformative new threat.
No, I think that's well said. And it's good to have a little bit more framework around AI. I think some people feel like it's still a Wild West type situation. And the reality is it is getting to be much better understood. It's being applied better, but then we can also understand how it's being used against us and respond appropriately without over-exaggerating or putting in too many resources into one bucket, if you will. So, makes sense.
And actually, often we talk about AI and attacker-defender dynamics, I actually think that we'll find in the long run that it's actually quite transformative for cyber defense. The more data companies have and the more attack knowledge that companies have, we'll find that actually operational cyber defense will become better and there'll be less cost and ultimately less complexity for security teams to be able to manage because of the use of AI. AI is ultimately a data issue, and cyber criminals have some, but they don't have as many as the major cybersecurity providers and threat intelligence companies that are out there. So that's a personal opinion. That's not the Intel 471 official line, but I think we'll find in 5 to 10 years that actually we've got some real transformative defense from a cyber perspective because of AI.
No, I would agree with you. And everybody listening to this is going to be saying less complexity will be welcomed universally. We're all on board for that. Another question I'd like to ask, Will, just wrapping things up here. You're so involved and do so much research with all of these hacking groups, especially, some of these Russian folks they're scary. They're very intimidating with what they do and how ruthless they can be. At the end of the day, how do you sleep at night? How do you lay your head on the pillow and feel safe and secure in things that are going on and how we're responding to these types of threats?
Well, I think ultimately it's about managing risk. So yes, there's an awful lot of attackers that are out there trying to compromise systems, and there are ransomware groups and cybercrime groups that are trying to operate and impact the companies that we protect. But ultimately, we find that the companies are investing, they're making good decisions. In general, we're seeing that capabilities are moving upwards in the ecosystem. And we think that we understand that while there's always risk to be managed, it can be managed. We've got a deep understanding of the cybercrime ecosystem and the cybercrime landscape now. So in many ways, even though there's hundreds of attacks, thousands of incidents every year, actually we've well versed as an industry, and we've got a maturity as an industry to understand really what's a real crisis and is something staying awake for, and actually something that can just be managed and mitigated.
Excellent. Well, that's reassuring. Good to know. Glad to hear we had guys like you out there, Will. Appreciate the time. If you want to learn a little bit more about Will and his company is up to, you can check him out at intel471.com. Thanks again, Will.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will. And to learn more about the work he and his colleagues are up to, you can check him out at intel471.com. I'd also like to thank you for joining us, and to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Will Dixon, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.